Let's take a look at what's been going on with the United States, the Ukraine, and Russia since 2012. Take a look at these clips from 2012, 2017, and now 2020, 2021, and 2022. Is Russia really the bad guy? Or is it actually the United States?
Взял на себя обязательство не сосредотачивать определенное количество войск в отдельных регионах на своей собственной территории. Ну еще.
U.S. government wants Russia not to focus their own troops of army in the specific territories in Russia.
Колония чья-то, что ли?
Are we the colony of the U.S.?
Ну, ты можешь себе представить, чтобы Америка взяла на себя обязательство на территории США не двигать войска так, как ей хочется?
Can you imagine that U.S. government will give a promise not to move their troops the way they want on their own territory?
Конечно, можно себе представить, что такие угрозы могут возникнуть. Сегодня их нет.
Of course, there can be threats, but now there are no threats of that kind.
И то, что нам говорят, это неправда. Сегодня.
And what they say is not true.
И нет угроз со стороны ни Ирана, ни Северной Кореи.
There is no real threats from Iran or Northern Korea.
И мы 1000 раз уже это показали на сегодняшний день.
And we'll already prove that hundreds of times.
Противоракетная оборона, безусловно, нацелена на то, чтобы нейтрализовать ракетно-ядерный потенциал Российской Федерации.
Now all this ballistic missile defense is really focused against Russia.
Почему? Потому что радары, которые поставляются вблизи наших границ, и противоракетные системы.
Because all the radars that is focused to our borders and all this anti-missile defense systems,
они будут перекрывать нашу территорию до Урала. То есть они будут перекрывать места базирования наших наземных ядерных сил.
So they will try to cover all of our land forces.
Вот и все. Нам говорят, вы не бойтесь, мы против вас их не используем.
They tell us, don't be afraid, we won't use it against you.
Но технически это все становится возможным. И никаких гарантий неиспользования против нас, даже письменных, они давать не хотят.
And technically it's possible that they can use these systems against Russia, and they don't want to give any guarantees that they won't use it. Any guarantees. They don't want to give any written guarantees.
Давайте не будем забывать, что Соединенные Штаты единственная страна в мире, которая когда-то применила ядерное оружие.
Let's not forget that USA is the only country who used nuclear weapons against non-nuclear country like Japan.
Причем применила против неядерной страны, против Японии. Мы что, это просто вычеркнули из памяти, что ли?
Can we just omit this fact from our memory?
Нет.
No.
И не можем это вычеркнуть.
And we cannot do that.
Мы всегда будем реагировать на угрозы, которые возникают возле наших границ.
We will always react against the threats that appear at our borders of our country.
Вот знаете, я сейчас скажу очень простые вещи.
Now I will tell a very simple thing.
Очень простые.
Very simple.
Понятные. И на
Understandable.
самом деле они лежат в основе многого, что происходит.
And they are at the very at the very core of all the things that is happening right now.
в наших отношениях с Соединенными Штатами.
in our relationships with USA.
Мы единственная страна, кроме США, которая
We are the only country besides the United
имеет
States
ядерную триаду
that has a nuclear triad
на земле, в воздухе и в океане.
on the land, in ocean and in air,
И количество ракет, и мощь,
and quantity of rockets and power
возможность доставки
and possibility of delivery.
сопоставимы. И именно это лежит в основе очень многих решений, направленных в том числе на сдерживание России. Вот
And that is why they're trying to stop Russia.
когда нам в Совете Безопасности ООН показывают какой-то порошок, который якобы найден в Багдаде, либо где-то на другой территории Ирака, и под этим предлогом, под предлогом того, что этот порошок является средством массового уничтожения, нужно вторгнуться в страну,
And when they show us, when we have a meeting in the United Nations, they show us some box with some powder and say, oh, this is a powder, this is very dangerous, and this is a weapon against all people and nations, and we have to enter some country to prevent the spread of this weapon.
ликвидировать там армию, повесить руководителей,
And liquidate the army and the president of that country.
какими бы они ни были. А потом выясняется, что никакого оружия массового уничтожения там нет.
And after they entered the country, at the end they realized that there is no weapon, there is nothing, there is no powder that can kill everybody.
У меня сомнения возникают. Так ли наши партнеры искренне?
I have a big concern. Do our partner, United States, is really sincere?
Мне кажется, что наши партнеры не хотят союзников.
I think our partners don't want to have partners.
Они хотят вассалов. Они хотят управлять.
They want to have servants, and they want to be a boss. They want to rule.
Но Россия так не работает.
But Russia doesn't work that way.
Мы видим, как сегодня складываются военные кампании, на чем основан успех. И поэтому наши вооруженные силы должны отвечать требованиям завтрашнего дня. И по обычным вооружениям, и тем более по силам ядерного.
Now we're seeing what's happening in the world, and that's why we should think about our army potential, the weapons, and all that stuff.
Сдерживания. В чем-то мы даже на полшага впереди наших американских партнеров.
I think that in some things we're one step ahead of our partners.
У них есть американских партнеров. У них есть свои преимущества на море, особенно по лодкам и так далее. У нас есть свои преимущества. Я сидел и всю дорогу, пока летел.
Of course, they have their own pluses, like they have some advantages on water army.
Navy.
Yeah, Navy.
В самолете писал. И мне хотелось сказать то, что я думаю и как я вижу ситуацию. Но хотелось это сказать не для того, чтобы кого-то в чем-то уличить или напугать, или пристыдить, а для того, чтобы создать другую атмосферу открытости в наших контактах и разговорах, чтобы не было недосказанности, чтобы мы понимали друг друга и говорили на...
And then once when I was on the plane, I started to write some stuff because I wanted, not just because I wanted to say, oh, you're bad, or I just want to make our partners feel ashamed or whatever. I just wanted to make it clear, and I just want to reveal the truth and show what we're really Russia wants.
На языке. Я ничего нового и такого неожиданного ни для кого не сказал. Мир меняется.
And I didn't say anything unusual.
Невозможно уже руководствоваться схемами, которые сложились после Второй мировой войны.
We cannot use the same schemes that we did after the World War II.
Даже с союзниками уже по-старому невозможно разговаривать.
We can even talk to our partners the old-fashioned way that we did before.
Новые угрозы появляются, новые центры силы появляются. И это нужно все учитывать.
We have new threats, so we have to consider in a new way.
И вот на это я хотел обратить внимание, а не ущипнуть кого-то. Потому что если мы будем это учитывать, эти изменения, и будем на них реагировать, то мы сможем создавать более устойчивую ситуацию. Если не будем, то будут постоянно возникать конфликты.
That's why we should look at all these problems in a broader way. So we won't just like fight with each other, but we should really concentrate on revealing the truth and to build the relationships on a new level.
Может быть, готовят третью военную операцию, и нас заранее предупреждают: не вмешивайтесь, не защищайте этих людей. Вмешаетесь, будете защищать, вот такие-то новые санкции последуют. И готовиться, может быть, к этому. Первый вариант. Наши действия будут зависеть не от хода переговоров, а от безусловного обеспечения безопасности России сегодня и на историческую перспективу. В этой связи мы ясно и четко дали понять, что дальнейшее движение НАТО на восток неприемлемо. Ну, чего здесь непонятного? Мы что ли ставим ракеты рядом с границами Соединенных Штатов? Нет. Это же Соединенные Штаты со своими ракетами пришли к нашему дому. На пороге нашего дома находятся уже. Значит, и американские партнеры нам говорят о том, что они готовы к началу этой дискуссии, этих переговоров в самом начале года в Женеве. Представители с обеих сторон назначены. Надеюсь, что развитие ситуации пойдет именно по этому пути.
Таким образом, согласился бы с предложением Николая Платоновича о том, что нашим, так сказать, западным партнерам можно дать последний шанс с тем, чтобы предложить им в кратчайшие сроки заставить Киев пойти на мир и выполнить Минские соглашения. В противном случае мы должны принять то решение, о котором сегодня говорится.
Что значит в противном случае? Вы предлагаете начать переговорный процесс?
Нет, я...
Или признавать суверенитет?
А я
Говорите прямо.
Я поддержу предложение о признании...
Поддержу или поддерживаю? Говорите прямо, Сергей.
Поддерживаю предложение...
Так и скажите, да или нет?
Да. Поддерживаю предложение о вхождении Донецкой и Луганской народных республик в состав Российской Федерации.
Да, мы об этом не говорим, мы этого не обсуждаем. Мы говорим о признании их независимости или нет.
Да, я поддерживаю предложение о признании независимости.
Хорошо, пожалуйста, садитесь. Спасибо. Владимир Александрович.
Before Trump was inaugurated, and listen to Senator McCain and Senator Graham explicitly tell the Ukrainians that they're going to do everything possible to arm the Ukrainians, to give them money, to do everything possible to enable them to fight the Russians.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
Час вже, щоб вони заплатили важчу ціну.
Our fight is not with the Russian people, but with Putin.
Ми боремося не з російським народом, але з Путіним.
Our promise to you is to take your cause to Washington.
Наша обіцянка – це те, що ми вашу боротьбу доведемо до Вашингтона.
Inform the American people of your bravery.
Проінформуємо американський народ про вашу відважність.
and make the case against Putin to the world.
І покажемо про докази проти Путіна усьому світу.
I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win, and we will do everything we can to provide you with what you need to win.
Now, I don't show you much of John McCain's statements because he spoke very low and it's difficult to hear, but he was basically echoing everything Lindsey Graham said. And there you see Amy Klobuchar dressed up in the colors of the Ukrainian flag 5 years before everyone on Twitter decided that was a very brave and noble thing to do. And she's kind of ahead of our time in that regard. And she was very much on board with this also. This idea that despite what President Obama said, that Ukraine isn't a vital interest to the United States, and therefore we shouldn't be spending lots of money and risking American lives and treasure in order to defend it, they were saying the opposite. They were saying way back in 2016, no, your cause is our cause. And we will do everything possible to make sure that you have everything you need from the United States to fight Russia. So this has been in the ether for a long time. Obviously, 5 years of Russiagate. Article in April 2016, and it was entitled The Obama Doctrine, signifying that it really wasn't one of the most in-depth looks into Obama's views of the world and the principles he used to make hard foreign policy decisions. And here's the section where they asked him, Jeffrey Goldberg did, why aren't you doing more to protect Ukraine by confronting Russia? Quote, Obama's theory here is simple. Ukraine is a core Russian interest, but not an American one. So Russia will always be able to maintain escalatory dominance there. Quote, this is Obama speaking, the fact is that Ukraine, which is a non-NATO country, is going to be vulnerable to military domination by Russia, no matter what we do, Obama said. I asked Obama whether his position on Ukraine was realistic or fatalistic. Obama said, quote, it's realistic, but this is an example of where we have to be very clear about what our core interests are and what we are willing to go to war for. And he's essentially saying Ukraine is not important enough to the United States to go to war with Russia in order to defend it. Here's the second part where Obama got kind of aggressive. And he said about the attacks on him for not being sufficiently confrontational, quote, now, if there is somebody in this town that would claim that we would consider going to war with Russia over Crimea and eastern Ukraine, then they should speak up and be very clear about that. The idea that talking tough or engaging in military action that is tangential to that particular area is somehow going to influence the decision-making of Russia or China is contrary to all the evidence we have seen over the last 50 years. This is the position of Donald Trump as well, when he ran for president in 2016, urging that we not see confrontation with Russia, but cooperation. And in fact, even though Trump was routinely called a puppet of Putin, he actually was more confrontational with Moscow than Obama was. He did send lethal arms to Ukraine, a lot of it, whereas Obama wouldn't. He also did everything he could to sabotage the Nord Stream pipeline, the most important project of Russia. So with the two most vital interests to Russia, Ukraine and the pipeline, Trump worked against, which should have immediately made the media stand up and acknowledge that the conspiracy theory they had spread for 5 years that Trump was controlled by Putin was a complete fiction and the deranged conspiracy theory and fairy tale. They stuck to that narrative, but both Obama and Trump had the same view of Russia, which is it's in our interest to cooperate with them and we shouldn't go to war with them over places like Syria and Ukraine. And yet now, no one can say that. It's taboo. It's considered pro-Putin or pro-Kremlin propaganda. I still thought Obama was right when he said this in 2016. I still think so now. And I think it's worth considering what he's saying when thinking about how dangerous the current climate is in demanding increasingly that we do more to intervene in Ukraine. Now, just to conclude, I want to point you to what some of you might know about already, but many of you probably don't, which is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. I think there's a very dangerous tendency that I know I share to think that bad things just aren't going to happen. It's probably necessary for our sense of security. You know, a lot of people thought it was impossible that Russia would invade Ukraine just because before a war happens, it's impossible to imagine a war breaking out like that. And yet it did happen. And I think a lot of people think, and you see it in some of this commentary, look, theoretically, of course, there's a possibility that Russia would use nuclear weapons or the United States would if we got involved militarily, but I just don't believe that's realistic. Why would Putin do that? So look at what happened in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. That began when Cuba, to use the terminology used for Ukraine, a sovereign country, invited and requested that the Russians place nuclear weapons on Cuban soil as a deterrent against future U.S. attempts at invasion. This followed the Bay of Pigs invasion, the failed U.S. attempt under John Kennedy to invade Cuba. And the Cubans were obviously concerned that they were going to try again. The CIA was. They were going to try and assassinate Castro, engineer regime change. And so they asked Russia to put nuclear weapons in Cuba as a way of warding off future invasions. And you'll be unsurprised to learn that the attitude of Washington was not, oh, look, Cuba's a sovereign country. They can invite any country they want or any weapons they want onto their own soil. That's just two sovereign countries doing what they want. No, that was not Washington's response. Washington viewed this as incredibly threatening to American national security. And President Kennedy ordered a blockade of Russia, preventing any ships from entering Cuba, to punish them and try and suffocate them and isolate them in order to force these Russian nuclear weapons out. And Russia had sent a submarine to lurk off the coast of Cuba, and the Americans found it, detected it. Unbeknownst to the Americans, the submarine was armed with tactical nuclear weapons, which sounds limiting, but the nuclear weapons the submarine had on board, because it was 25 years after the first usage, was roughly the same size as the nuclear bomb the United States dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, killing hundreds of thousands of people and creating generations of people suffering from radiation poisoning. An incredibly explosive and devastating weapon, nuclear weapon. And when the Americans found that submarine, they began dropping bombs around it to explode and scare the submarine into feeling like they were being besieged. But the commanders of the submarine misperceived the intentions of the United States, which is often possible in a war zone. And they didn't think they were missing on purpose. They thought they were trying to hit the submarine, but were just missing and getting closer and closer. And so the two commanders on board that Russian submarine decided, they made the choice, not considered, they committed to detonating the tactical nuclear weapon they had on board against all the U.S. ships surrounding them, which obviously would have caused major damage, not just to Cuba, but to South Florida and large parts of the United States, including with radiation. That choice was made and was minutes away from happening. Minutes. And had that happened, had the Russians used a nuclear weapon against the United States, obviously the United States, which was already on high nuclear alert, like Russia is now, would have used nuclear weapons against the Russians. Probably would have bombed Moscow and major cities with nuclear-tipped missiles aimed at those cities, which in turn could easily and probably would easily have caused the Russians to launch a second strike and a retaliation and cause nuclear conflagration. That's how close we came, minutes away. And this National Geographic article from March of 2016 tells the story of Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov, who is widely credited with averting nuclear war. This young Russian commander who had the same authority as the two submarine commanders who had ordered this nuclear attack, he intervened and said and argued, no, the Americans are not trying to blow you up. They're missing on purpose. They're detonating bombs around you as a warning to tell you to ascend onto the surface of the water. And therefore, there's no justification for using nuclear weapons against you because they're not trying to explode your submarine. And he prevailed. He convinced them to reverse their decision to use nuclear weapons. And as a result, he is credited with averting nuclear catastrophe. We came minutes away, due not to intention, but to misperception about what American and Russian intentions were, which can easily happen in a war zone. So if your attitude is to look at all these people, these sociopaths and maniacs, mainstreaming the idea of a no-fly zone or direct military confrontation with Russia, and you want to tell yourself, oh, don't worry, I get the risk theoretically, but there's no way countries would actually go to war with nuclear weapons when each side has them. They know, just look at this history. This is not the only time we came close to nuclear weapons exchanges, but it's the best documented one. It's very possible. We see already after 1 week of war how much ideas have escalated, how much the discourse has intensified. And as this goes on, it's very easy to see how that could get worse. So I think the main purpose, again, is to look at the discourse. And even if you're somebody who is absolutely convinced that the Western consensus is the right one, that Russia is clearly the party to blame, that Putin is an evil, maniacal, murderous despot, that what's happening in Ukraine is somehow in another moral category than what the U.S. did in Iraq. Not sure, I'd love to hear that argument, but let's assume that you're one of the people who believe that. Even if you're somebody who believes all those things, it's still incumbent upon you to use your faculties of reason to be very wary of anything that could lead to results driven by unconstrained emotion or a desire, like in the UK, to relive past glory and to compensate for insecurities about potency and masculinity, or to want vengeance or to feel strong, and all these instincts that are incredibly dangerous. We're very close to having them explode in ways that, if they do further, will be well beyond our control.
I'd like to hear your thoughts. Please leave your comments below.